Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of The Quarterdeck. In our hero highlights this week, we're going to take a look at the heroism and the life of Private Dale Merlin Hansen of the United States Marine Corps. In our reading this week of our book, With the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we continue our story on how the division is preparing themselves in order to go ahead and conduct that mission that they're about to have and actually head into Iraq. Last week we discussed about the division and how they were preparing for the NBC attacks that they were foreseeing to happen and how they used pigeons to allow them to help and detect and alert them of any kind of chemical attack that they might be having. This week we're going to talk about how they continued doing the rehearsals, how they did rehearsals when they started out using Legos, and now they were going to start using the jerseys in order to actually visualize the actual attack that they're going to do from Kuwait as they head all the way into Baghdad to liberate the people of Iraq.
Drop and give me 25. I'm the gunny.
It's time for the gunny.
The Quarterdeck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to The Quarterdeck. I am your host, Miguel, the Gunny Signs.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
The Quarterdeck. Welcome back to this week's episode of The Quarterdeck. I am Miguel, the Gunny Signs, and all of you guys that are new, welcome. All my continued supporters, welcome to this week's episode. And this week I want to talk a little bit about the age difference in the Marine Corps. And I was having a discussion with another fellow Marine that we talked about actually through TikTok, and we were talking about how they ran into a Marine that was born in the year 2000. Now, this was when she actually enlisted in the Marine Corps, so whenever she was in boot camp, this crazy knucklehead was when they were born. That's a freaking long time. I mean, that's young. So it makes us freaking old farts feel kind of old. And then I replied to her like, oh my God, if you enlisted in the Marine Corps in 2000, this guy was just barely born. I enlisted in 95. And I was like, oh my goodness. This kid was still a freaking sperm waiting to be deposited and actually made into a little kid when I came into the Marine Corps. And that's a very, very unique philosophy and way to think about it. But, it's true. I mean, these Marines are so young and, kind of forget that they enlist into the Marine Corps when they come directly out of high school. And because we've been in the Marine Corps for so long, or if you got out of the service already and completed your time, it's just amazing. How these Marines are getting younger and younger when they come in. And I don't think it's the fact that they're getting younger. It's more the fact that we are becoming more seasoned, older, more wise, and knowledgeable with everything that we do in life and everything else that's going on around us. But the way we were talking about this was because her husband was actually their drill instructor when they came into the service. Now, whenever he was a drill instructor, he went in to MCRD San Diego around 2006 or 2007, I believe. Now, this was during the time when I was already out there on Edson Range on my quota. Now, those of you that don't know what actual quota means is when you're down there as a drill instructor, you're working in the actual trenches or the training companies. You're out there with the training companies actually training recruits as they go through their cycles for those 3 months time frames. And so he came in during that time, and I was already over there assigned to Weapons Field Training Battalion in charge basically of the Crucible and their field training while they're down there to understand and learn how to do all those events when they're there to make sure all those training gets accomplished. So every single company that comes through, every single platoon that went through, we dealt with individually. And I had approximately about 20 other Marines that were assigned to me while I was there, and they handled basically the running the courses, explaining them how to do certain events, and running the events that we were down there in Edson Range on Camp Pendleton, California. Now, speaking of those times down there in the trenches, we also talk a lot about some of the things that we did when we were down there in the depot. Now, some of those things I'm not going to get into detail because I just don't want to. I don't want to say anything that's going to affect the way that individuals are treated, they're trained, or anything like that down there in any of the depots, whether it's Parris Island or it's South Carolina. But but we just need to understand that there is a certain way that we actually conduct our training down there to ensure that these young men are trained to the best of our ability to make sure that they graduate there being a basically trained Marine. That's just it. They're basically trained. They're not experts. They're not anything that, they're going to go out there and do the greatest thing in the world, because right now they're just learning. And it's our responsibility down there as a drill instructor to go ahead and get them to that point where they're basically trained and they can head off to their actual next period of instruction or evolution, which is MCT or SOI, the Marine Combat Training or School of Infantry, depending on what their MS is going to be. They'll head out there and get those trainings. So, it's kind of like a way that we look at it. But one of the things that we were actually talking about was the training schedule. A lot of individuals are like, oh man, the training schedule is just so hectic and this and that and everything else. And they were asking, when is by far probably the worst part of the training schedule that, you ever dealt with? Now, I'm going to tell you guys, whenever we picked up a company of recruits, depending usually whenever our last one graduated, there was times when we actually got a week, maybe 2 weeks off without having any recruits to train. That doesn't mean that we had a whole week or 2 weeks off of not doing anything. We took time during that time to go to the rifle range, to get swim quad done, or any other annual training events that we needed to get done during that time frame. So a lot of individuals think that, during that time they're just off. They get a lot of time off and they don't do anything. I wish that was the case, but no. We ended up having to do the rifle range, the swim qual, or any other kind of trainings that we needed to do in order to make sure that all of our annual events were completed while we were still down there on the depot. And there were times, I think only one time that we actually had 4 weeks between cycles. I mean, my goodness, that's a freaking long time. It's a lot of time that we had. And, we had the weekends off like we normally did. But we conducted a whole week of rifle range, a whole week of swim qual for everybody that needed to requalify with that. During that time, we went ahead and ran our PFTs, our CFTs to make sure they were all completed. And if you were a new drill instructor that just graduated from drill instructor school and you were going to start with the company, then they would send you off during that time to Bird Dog or work with another company for a pickup to kind of get you used to working for our pickup whenever our time came for us to actually pick up the recruits that we had that we were going to pick up. Now, that's what I did when I first came into the actual trenches. I graduated DI school in 2004. And then we had a time frame where the company that we were going to be going to, they were already finishing up their cycle. And, it just so happened that the same company that I went back to was the same company that I went there when I was in drill instructor school to go ahead and do like my initial walk or training with them to make sure that I was able to actually learn how to be a drill instructor. I mean, the basic thing was that you actually have to kind of learn how to read the training schedule and understand the kind of hours that you're going to be working. Because, man, I can honestly say that for me, it was a blast. I had a great time down there as a drill instructor. I mean, you got to work with some of the great Marines that are in the Marine Corps, the top 10% of Marines that volunteer to actually go down there to drill instructor school. Now, our class that we went to, Class 2 TAC 04, we all were volunteers that we all volunteered to go down there for a special duty assignment. And today, it's kind of difficult sometimes to get actual individuals that want to go to these special duty assignments, whether it's drill instructor recruiting or Marine Security Guard MSG duty. It's sometimes difficult to get individuals to go. And I got to say, yes, recruiting is probably by far the hardest to get people to go. They have to be voluntold to actually go down and to do recruiting, because I have no hate towards recruiters. Their job is very, very difficult. Not saying that we as a drill instructor didn't have a difficult task, but we're not out there on the streets trying to find people to actually get them into the Marine Corps and eventually get them down there to us down there at the depots to actually train them to become those basically trained Marines. So, all the different special duty assignments, but those big three are the main ones that people actually, focus on. And, each of them have their own individual challenges. and the things that you have to accomplish in order to get done. But like for us as drill instructors, we start our cycle. We do pickups on Friday. That is known as Black Friday. And those of you that have gone through recruit training, you know exactly what I'm talking about when the initial shock comes when the recruits meet their drill instructors for the very first time and they get an understanding that they're going to be with them for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 3 months to make sure that they learn how to eat, how to sleep, how to take a shower, all those different things that they're going to learn from the get-go to make sure that they know how to become those basically trained Marines so they can move on with the rest of their career as they progress through the combat training and then eventually to the MLS school to get out there to the fleet. That was the main thing that we kind of discussed this week because, it just surprised us how young these Marines are. But then again, because we're so old. We're so old and, we're so used to people being our age that were in the Marine Corps when we came in that now we're looking at these individuals that came into the Marine Corps and they weren't even born yet by the time we were actually enlisting into the Marine Corps and going through recruit training, whether it was in Parris Island or in MCRD in San Diego, California. Are you looking for a photographer who can capture the most important moments in your life? Look no further than Miguel Saenz Photography. Miguel Saenz is an award-winning photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty and emotions of weddings, family portraits, and special events. With years of experience and a creative eye, Miguel Saenz will create stunning images that you'll treasure for years to come. Whether you're looking for a traditional wedding album, a unique family portrait, or a professional headshot for your business, Miguel Saenz Photography has the expertise to bring your vision to life. From the initial consultation to the final product, Miguel Saenz will work with you every step of the way to ensure that your images reflect your unique style and personality. Don't settle for mediocre photographs that simply document an event. Trust Miguel Saenz Photography to create timeless images that capture the essence of your special moments. Book your session today and experience the magic of Miguel Saenz Photography. Visit Miguel Saenz Photography online at miguelsaenzphotography.com to see examples of his work and schedule your appointment today.
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back into time.
Last week in our reading of the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we discussed how the Marine Corps adopted a new Marine into every battalion out there in Kuwait. Yes, a pigeon. They all had a pigeon that they had with them in order to help them with the gas attacks or any kind of nuclear biological weapons that Saddam Hussein would be able to use against the division. This week we're going to discuss and how they continue to do all their training. We've already discussed about how the division used the jerseys in order for them to be able to see the units bigger than they would have if they were going to continue to go ahead and use Legos to go ahead and show the different vehicles, the units as they maneuvered on the big giant sand table that they had put together. So now the division continued a robust plan in combat training, weapons calibration, and weapon zeroing at the extensive ranges in western Kuwait. The Udari Range Complex consisted of a significant portion of the land area of western Kuwait. It took an integrated, detailed effort from the division, the regiment, and battalion staffs to coordinate training on these ranges. Deconflicting training with the Army units in the Kuwaitis provided a difficult time, but the common goal of combat readiness, all parties worked through the issues of airspace, coordination, surface danger zones, and safety limits. In many cases, the RCTs coordinated to set up their own small arm ranges just north of the LSAs. This allowed the Marines the opportunity to fully integrate and test new weapon systems they had just recently received. One of the significant issues for the division was calibration of artillery and tank systems. 11th Marines conducted a full court press to ensure accurate ammunition, powder projectile, and muzzle velocity data was obtained. A calibration process that ensures the combinations of ammunition and firing conditions produce the most accurate artillery fire possible. Calibration required firing rounds of each expected type with various propellants and carefully measuring muzzle velocities using radar. This can be a tedious process, but it's a critical requirement for the first round accuracy in war. Later in combat, the Marines of the division learned it was well worth the time and effort to achieve the last critical points of accuracy when required to silence hidden enemy mortars, urban ambushes, and other targets. These were often prosecuted as danger close ranges and with a high potential for friendly or civilian casualties. For tankers, the calibration was equally important in order to ascertain the firing characteristics of various combinations of ammunition and conditions. For both artillery and tank ammunition, however, the division faced significant challenges in getting war reserve ammunition released for the calibration process. Because of concerns with expending war reserve stocks prior to combat and environmental concerns with depleted uranium, ammunition expenditure, getting tank ammunition released for calibration proved to be very difficult. A similar issue arose with the tube launch optically tracked wire guided or TOW anti-tank missile. The Marines had conducted all their training using the TOW JLA with the TOW IEB reserve for war stocks. When the Marines opened the crate for fire, TOW 2Bs for the first time, there were a number of misses. This caused significant concern that the new missiles were defective in either software or hardware. Repeated firings could not determine the cause. Finally, Chief Warrant Officer Charles Colston, the RCT-5 weapons officer, discovered the cause of the misses. Because the Marines had only fired the TOW 2As in training, they had not adjusted to the different aim point required when firing the TOW 2 Bravos. Because the TOW 2 Bravos uses a significantly different flight profile and attack mechanism, using the sighting method the Marines were used to with the TOW 2 Alphas, caused the missile to overfly the target. Although early corrected once discovered, the incident was a warning of the risk of reserving new weapons for combat only and not fully integrating them into the Marines' experience. In case of war, break glass weapon systems can have dangerous unintended consequences. Each of the battalions trained their TOW Marines to overcome the potentially gunnery error. Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Parks, the weapons officer for 1-4, trained 2 Marines, Sergeant David Smith and Sergeant David Coffer, to serve as TOW snipers. These Marines received focused training on TOW 2 Bravos, gunnery, and were allocated all the battalion's TOW 2 Bravo missiles, while the remaining TOW gunners were allocated TOW 2 Alpha missiles. Iraqi troops and foreign preliminaries would soon know firsthand the tactical prowess of these 2 Marines. The combat engineers knew that combined arms rehearsals were the key to any successful deliberate breaching operation. While the breach of the Kuwaiti border obstacles was expected to be lightly opposed, the breach of the Iraqi border obstacle system was more uncertain. To ensure the quality and thoroughness of the division's preparations, CEB constructed a full-scale mock-up of the Kuwaiti border obstacles near LSA Ripper. Each obstacle clearing detachment, or OCD, performed combined arms rehearsals through the breach lanes with their supported battalions. The rehearsals allowed the engineers and infantry to practice the complexities of the deliberate breach and work out timing and control issues prior to combat. During this period, the new towed assault bridges, or TABs, arrived in theater, and CEB and Mark Syscom trained RCT-5 and RCT-7 on the employment of the new type of bridge over wet and dry gaps. The training also had a material cost on men and machines. The division carefully balanced and desired to train with the necessity of keeping all of the AAV tanks and other equipment ready to reorient to the north. Maintaining the AAVs was a special challenge, as the division was the process of transitioning from the old AAV 7 Alpha 1 straight leg track to the upgraded model, the Ram RS. Old straight leg parts were no longer stocked in the supply system in anticipation of the completion of the upgrades. Many of the vehicles contained on MPS ships, however, were the old models. For the year prior, 3rd Assault Amphibious Battalion has systematically built up very large pre-expendable bins, or PEBs, of parts. These stocks of high-usage, low-cost items also included large stocks of oil, fuel, and air filters. The Amphibious Vehicle Test Branch, or AVTB, also gave the AA Battalion all of its straight leg parts to add to their stocks a few months prior to their deployment. The battalion also stockpiled parts scrounged from AAVs going to the depot for upgraded. The battalion embarked and mobile loaded all of these parts and expendables and brought them into theater. The division immediately began low-mileage mechanized infantry training in the local Kuwaiti desert, designed to limit wear and tear. Despite the low mileage, this hard training expediently took a toll on the MPS Antrax and had sat in storage on a ship at sea. The AAV company and battalion maintenance crews worked often around the clock to keep all these vehicles in top running condition. The supply system for the repair parts in Kuwait was not functioning anywhere near capacity, and the only parts to be had were the ones the battalion had embarked themselves, or parts selectively interchanged of a dead AAV. A month later, 3rd AA Battalion's parts and supplies were down to only 10% remaining. Because of a lack of resupply in theater, a good share of the items they had painstakingly laid in for combat operations had been required just to ensure the division was ready to cross the LD at a moment's notice. The repair parts challenge identified early on would continue to bedevil divisions and the CCS Marines in the months ahead. Now, this was a very big issue because I can recall and I remember distinctly that there were so many parts that sometimes broke because it's going to happen. These are equipments that are very heavy, they're very bulky, and they weigh a lot. And parts break, parts snap, things got to get replaced, and the supply issue was huge because these parts were not readily available like they were back in CONUS. These were the parts that were actually stocked on these MPS ships that were floating around the sea just in the event that something should happen and all this equipment would get dropped off. So the Marines in the division would be able to go ahead and conduct their missions when they needed to. And this was a very, very hard lesson learned because they realized that, hey, all these equipment and all these parts that we have on these ships are old. They're not keeping up with the time frame and the new improvements in all these vehicles or all these new weapon systems that we now have in the Marine Corps. And the Marines are still being trained on these old ones, or they're not prepared to actually handle them using these kinds of weapon systems in the actual theater. I can remember that I talked to a lot of individuals that went through Desert Storm, the initial war down there in Kuwait. And they can tell me that the artillery battalions, when they went down there, they're so used to using the M1908 howitzer system. And when they got into country, all they had in the MPS ships were a lot of Paladin, the self-propelled howitzers. So they had to learn how to operate those weapon systems when they got into country. Not that it's something that the Marines can't do, but hey, come on, we got to start thinking about these things, that we only have certain kinds of weapon systems aboard these ships. And hey, sometimes the Marines, they're not trained to use them, but we're going to adapt. We're going to overcome, and we're going to learn how to use all these weapon systems. Hero Highlight. This week in our Hero Highlights, we take a look at the life and the citation of Private Dale Merlin Hansen, United States Marine Corps. Dale Merlin Hansen was born 13 December 1922 in Windsor, Nebraska. While attending the School of Cumming County, he helped out on the family farm, and after graduating from high school in Windsor in 1940, he worked full-time on the farm. For relaxation, he played sandlot baseball and softball or went horseback riding. The 5'9", 141-pound Nebraska farmer was inducted into the Marine Corps Reserve on 11 May 1944. He completed recruit training at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California, and was then assigned to the Infantry Training Battalion at Camp Pendleton, California, where he underwent 4 weeks of infantry introduction and 2 weeks of training with the Browning automatic rifle. With that weapon, he turned in a score of 175 to become an expert automatic rifleman. Private Hansen sailed for the Pacific Theater on 12 November 1944 with a replacement draft, and the following month joined Company E, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines at Pavuvu in the Russell Islands. There, he underwent bazooka training before sailing with the 1st Marine Division for maneuvers in Banica Islands and Guadalcanal in 1945. Late that March, after a few more days back in Pavuvu, the division left for Okinawa, where Private Hansen landed with his unit on Easter Sunday, 1 April. The action which brought him the Medal of Honor occurred in the battle for Hill 60 on the southern part of the island, where his determination and total disregard of personal danger helped his unit take well-defended enemy position. Private Hansen was killed by a Japanese sniper on 11 May 1945 in the Wana-Dankishi Ridge fighting. The Medal of Honor was presented to Private Hansen's parents on 30 May 1946 by the officer in charge of the Midwestern Region Recruiting Division as part of the Windsor's Memorial Day observance. Private Hansen was initially buried in the 1st Marine Division Cemetery on Okinawa, but his remains were re-entered into the United States in 1948 for burial in Windsor, Nebraska. The Quarterdeck. If you're just joining us, you've been listening to The Quarterdeck with Miguel the Gunny Signs. This week, we continued our reading with the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, and we talked about how the division used those red jersey drills that they used last week in our reading, and now put it to the test because now that we're actually doing training on a range near Kuwait to make sure that all the weapon systems were properly calibrated, so whenever they actually headed across the border into Iraq, there would be no reason why they would not hit still on target to ensure they annihilated the enemy with accurate fire support from artillery, tank fire, whatever it may be. In our hero highlights this week, we took a look at the story about Private Dale Merlin Hansen, United States Marine Corps, another great Marine, outstanding Marine, a warrior, a war hero that went above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that he completed his mission, to make sure that he did everything to the best of his ability. Make sure that you don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, our channel, to make sure that you're reminded every single week when our new episode has uploaded and it's ready to be downloaded for you to go ahead and enjoy it for the rest of the week. Here's to you having a great weekend. Enjoy your weekend. Hey, this is the 4th of July weekend. 4th of July is during the week this week, but enjoy your weekend with your family. Have some time, some fireworks. Be safe. Make sure nobody blows off any fingers, and continue to have a great rest of the week. Until next week, this is Miguel the Gunny Signs sounding Liberty Call.
Get out the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.